Okay.
All right. So yes, thank you so much. I want to again thank the Muslim Mental Health Conference for another year invitation to this esteemed mental health conference. And I want to just open up with a little information about our organization and just a brief about the participants in today's conversation before I hand it over to our moderator. And we also have a communications consultant who will be opening with a short reading. So the Muslim Life Planning Institute is a national community building social enterprise founded to address the deep concern for the life journey of Muslims in America. It is an effort intended to deliver dynamic educational materials and instruction to interdisciplinary audiences with a focus on Islam and its impact on business, education, culture, and the way we are governed as a nation and society. And today, I'm honored to have my partners in Muslim Life Planning Institute, Muslim Life Planning Network here. And that would be Samuel Sharif, who is the Director of Economic Development, Chief Economic Development Officer, and our Chief Impact Officer, and a Chief Immersive Learning Officer, and that's Ms. Linda Howard. A little bit about the people who will be speaking to you today, creating a little bit of the context of our conversation along with our moderator will be Dr. Hamid El-Amin. And you can probably get these bios in the Whova app, the longer actual bios themselves, but I'll just read in brief who they are so you have a little bit of context. He is a retired college professor who has served as a community college psychology, social science instructor, assistant professor of psychology and counseling, diversity training consultant, drug and alcohol abuse counselor, and racism training consultant. Dr. El-Amin currently works with the Clara Muhammad School Consortium and the Sister Clara Muhammad Memorial Education Foundation and other national organizations supporting Islamic education in community schools. Dr. Debbie El-Montazer was the founding and former principal of the Khalil Gibran International Academy in Brooklyn, New York. She frequently lectures, serves on panels, and facilitates teacher and public workshops on cultural diversity, conflict resolution, Arab culture, Islam, and Muslims in America. Dr. Ted Sutton is the CEO and founder of Sutton House Incorporated and the Ministers of Defense, which focuses on youth and community development. He possesses a master's degree in criminology, specializing in juvenile delinquency prevention, and a doctorate degree in humanities. Musawar Ali Shabazz, better known to students and friends as Sensei Ali, has more than 45 years in the martial arts. Sensei is passionate about community. As he turns 80 years young in July of this year, alhamdulillah, he continues to encourage students to develop the skills necessary to avoid conflict and maintain readiness through devotion to physical, spiritual, emotional, and mental wellness. Imam Wahideen Sharif currently serves as the Imam of Masjid Wahiduddin in Irvington, New Jersey. He is the former director and senior advisor to the mayor of the city of Newark, Department of Economics and Housing Development. Imam Sharif is also the co-founder and executive board member of the Newark Interfaith Coalition for Hope and Peace. Our moderator today is Imam Earl Al-Amin, and he is currently the resident at the Muslim Community Cultural Center of Baltimore, and also served as vice president of program development at the National Centers of Institution and Alternatives, which is a human services organization that is comprised of over 600 employees. And hopefully I didn't miss anybody. I pray that I did not. Again, welcome to our profound conversation, examining community violence, reversing injurious American injustice and cultural incompetence, restoring sanity. Today, we'll be opening with a reading from Muslim Life Planning Institute's communication consultant, Ms. Khadija Ali, who will be reading from How Are the Children? So Khadija, would you open up for us, please?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this poem is And How Are the Children by Patrick O'Neill. Among the most accomplished and fabled tribes of Africa, no tribe was considered to have warriors more fearsome or more intelligent than the mighty Maasai. It is perhaps surprising then to learn the traditional greeting that passed between Maasai warriors. Kasarian Ingera, one would always say to another. It means, and how are the children? It is still the traditional greeting among the Maasai, acknowledging the high value that the Maasai always place on their children's well being. Even warriors with no children of their own would always give the traditional answer all the children are well, meaning, of course, that peace and safety prevail, that the priorities of protecting the young, the powerless, are in place. That Maasai society has not forgotten its reason for being, its proper functions and responsibilities. All the children are well means that life is good. It means that the daily struggles for existence do not preclude proper caring for their young. I wonder if it might affect our consciousness of our own children's welfare in our culture if we took to greeting each other with this daily question And how are the children? I wonder if we heard that question and passed it along to each other a dozen times a day, if it would begin to make a difference in the reality of how children are thought of, cared for, about in our society. I wonder if every adult among us, parent and non parent alike, felt an equal weight for the daily care and protection of all the children in our community, in our town, in our state, in our country. I wonder if we could truly say without any hesitation, the children are well. Yes, all the children are well. What would it be like if the minister began every worship service by answering the question, And how are the children? If every town leader had to answer the question at the beginning of every meeting, And how are the children? Are they well? Wouldn't it be interesting to hear their answers? What would it be like? I wonder. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khadija. I'd like to give it over to Imam White. I'm sorry, Imam Earl Alameen to open up.
Yes, good morning. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you.
We want to begin this session in providing an Islamic perspective using the Quran and the Quranic sciences to give an interpretive analysis and unique treatment healing modality that is designed to enhance the mental health and the well-being of individuals, families, and communities. We find this is very important for us. And I'd like to begin with our esteemed panelists that we have and respectfully request that all of our panelists who are involved to chime in when they feel that they have something to contribute. But I'd like to ask Sensei Ali and Dr. Ted Sutton, because I know of their work here in the Baltimore metropolitan area and how they work to establish a wholeness within the young people that they work with. So I would like to ask the question, Sensei, to open it up with how are the children? And maybe we might want to start, Sensei, with a different perspective from just saying, would you please let everyone know what Sensei means and what a Sensei does? I think our audience that we have might not, we have people from all over the world that are tuned in. And so maybe we need to, can you define that for us?
Sensei means teacher, one who came before. One who comes before is another teacher. So Sensei means teacher, one who came before, and it's all about passing on skills that's been taught to teachers in the past. So I'm just a conduit of knowledge that has been here before, and I'm looking to pass it on.
So when Sensei, when we talk about, and Dr. Ted, please, you can chime in on this also. When we talk about how are the children here in the Baltimore metropolitan area, we've seen a spike in violence, especially among the children in this year, in the year 2021. How do we find a way to improve on our communication to them and to help to allow them allow them tools that will help them to refrain from violence?
Well, I would say that we have to educate or re-educate. At the same time, we have to be able to provide mentors who have different skill sets to be able to help train those who are out there into these different skill sets. But one is that we have to educate, because I find it appalling that our youth are out there killing each other. And so what are they dying for? Who are they dying for? What is their purpose? Are they expendable that are born and to be just thrown away as trash? I find it appalling that we speak about Black Lives Matter, but my feeling on that is every time a black body hits the ground, there should be an uproar in disgust that is happening in our community. So how are the children? I would say that the children are not well. They are not well, not in the society that we're living in. There's too many. I mean, they just did a report. I heard yesterday that this is the sixth year in Baltimore where the death rate has been over 300. So we're talking about over 1,800 people. Where are they coming from? And their lives are being extinguished at an early age. I mean, they haven't even lived yet. So how are the children? I say not well.
So when we say that they're not well, how, as a sensei, and I don't know Dr. Sutton if he's on, but as a sensei, how do we equip them to not become impulse driven? Because we find in many instances that our young people are what we found out are impulse driven, that they can't make those decisions as it relates to inflicting violence, being the perpetrators of violence. So in the field that you're in, and over the many 40 over years that you've worked in, how do we corral the young people and allow them to learn how to control their impulses? What is it that you do in the science of what you do as a sensei?
Educate. Patience.
Okay. How do we, when you say patience and so when we say it, so that education comes out of, can we talk about maybe a discipline that occurs? How do we know that the art form that you teach is an imperative that one has to have a discipline? What are the tools that you use to give the children discipline?
Exercise, teaching them different exercises, teaching them different skill sets, but basically really teaching them that we're not teaching you here to hurt anybody. We're teaching you how to improve upon yourself so that you will be a better person. We have them look at when people get angry, that they're more vulnerable to somebody who is calm and who can speak what he has to say in a calm voice. People who holler and scream, they really don't hear anything or they don't hear anybody. So it takes discipline. It takes education as well. So we use different modules in terms of letting them see that. we use different techniques in order to allow them to see that. In my school, we have a saying that knowledge is power. We also have a saying that pain is knowledge too, and that in learning how to do certain things, sometimes it requires pain to understand, but in the end, that you're going to learn a skill set that will help you to be a better person. So it takes patience.
So
It takes patience. It takes
in the healing process,
it takes time.
time. That's what I wanted. This process this is a lifetime process, or would it not be? It's not something that in Western society we look forward to immediate gratification in a sense where instant coffee, instant potatoes, pop pop, fizz fizz, oh what a relief it is, and then we think that the individual will be transformed if he comes to you for 6 months. But can you explain that this is a lifetime journey, because the art form that you are teaching is from the time that they begin and the time that they depart from this earth.
Correct. This is a lifetime. This is a lifetime journey. This is a journey of many skills, of many things to learn, and it's not something that's going to happen in 6 months. It's not even going to happen in a year. But at the same time that they're there, right? We start to shave away certain things that they've learned, right? And put in things that they are going to help them be better persons.
So let me ask you.
But it takes time. It takes time, and they learn. And what happens is that because they're in this school, we have mentors. We have mentors, not just myself as a teacher, but we have other brothers in there, sisters in there who are teachers, mentors, teaching them different skill sets, teaching them different things to help to improve their life. So it's a small village. It's a small village inside of a village, right? And we're using all the skills that we can. We're using all the people that we can, right, to make the student a better person.
So when we talk about this violence that we see that is occurring in most major cities in America, and how the young people are influenced, this art form that you have been successful at teaching young people to control their impulses, to be disciplined enough and physically, emotionally, and actually spiritually also. I would think that spiritually also that what you impart to them. And I'd like for I see that Dr. Sutton is Dr. Sutton. Are you here with us?
Yes, I am.
I saw that you came. Dr. Sutton, you have been working for some period of time, as I very well know, in the Baltimore metropolitan area around the country, with young people, especially in the gang field. What do you think when this violence? What is this violence? Why are these young people perpetuating violence on one another? Unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me? Yes, I said one thing is I find that I feel it's a indirect form of self-suicide. And when I say that, meaning you have people who they see themselves to not be worth something, and they are okay with taking the life of someone that they feel looks like them. And with that, I say that one of the things that when you take away hope from some of our young people, it creates the perfect criminal, a person with nothing to lose. And so even with me, myself, coming from parents who were, my father was a civil rights leader, my mother worked for Medgar Evers, uncle was a Black Panther, with Bunchy Carter. I ended up being that middle child growing up in Baltimore and feeling that adults could not protect me. And so when I hooked up with that group, the same group that they wrote the series The Wire behind, I was known as Crazy Ted. A lot of people knew my godfather, a man named Little Melvin Williams. And I went through and losing a lot of my friends and to the streets on different levels. And so, but one thing that I found is a lot of them didn't have a foundation when they got sick and tired of being sick and tired of being in the streets. They didn't have a foundation to actually go back to. And so for me, that was the one component that I actually had, is people that were willing to invest in me after I decided that I possibly could live. See, it doesn't matter if you go to prison, if or get a girl pregnant, or have unprotected sex, or live this type of life. If there's not, if you don't think you're going to live past 21, or if you don't think you're going to live past 25, none of going to getting a high school diploma really does not even matter in this case, because you have already accepted that most likely I'm not going to live past a certain amount of time. And so I think that for me, I just ended up actually having an opportunity where I was able to change and turn that around. And so it really became something different, you know, for me to work with some of these young men that actually was in the same place that I was. And actually, some of them, I was actually worse than some of them, you know, but to be able to see and to embrace that people can change, that you don't have to die where you live. Your current situation doesn't have to be your final destination. And I think that we have to promote that message, and they have to hear it more from just one person.
Well, man, if I may, do you think that this violence that we see that is impacting, especially in the inner cities in America now, not only in the inner cities in America, but do you think that the violence has now become a culture? It's become a culture within itself.
Absolutely. Unfortunate, if you even go back to the rap game, you know, really started, and it started out kind of like in a party way. And then we had a very significant moment, and that was when like Chuck D and KRS-One and people, it was okay to wear the African medallion. You know, it was okay to wear the kente cloth in hip hop, and they were doing the song Self Destruction. I think that that was the strongest moment that we had to really turn and pivot. But when gangster rap really took a hold, and the record label saw that this was something that really would sell, it turned the culture into, you're not hard unless you're talking about the, you know, the guns, how many people you've killed, you know what I'm saying, how many packages you flipped. And to be honest with you, it's so backwards, is because really real gangsters move in silence. So you don't make signs, you don't make songs about how many people that you've killed. Don't make songs about you moving keys. And so it was so unrealistic. But unfortunately, like in my book, I have a chapter that talks about, it's actually the book is temporarily. Oh
Can't.
boy.
Okay. So now I think we lost you for a second there. The in your work with the individuals, you said something that was very significant. You said that the way you were raised, that you came from what I would call a balanced family, and so that you had even in your dysfunctionality, in the period of time that you were going through it, that you had some family or support system that would allow you to, and that in the early formative years of your life, that what was deposited in you were values, that allowed you to evolve out of that. Now, was that what caused you to come from Crazy Ted to Dr. Ted? What was it that made you go from Crazy Ted to Dr. Ted?
Well, to be honest with you, it took a lot of things, because I ended up losing a lot of people to the streets. My godfather, Little Melvin, they got 35 years. Two of my guys received life plus 20. one of my guys was found dead in his car, stabbed up in Drew Hill Park. And then I ended up looking at time for something I didn't do because one of my lieutenants got caught up and I had my house raided. And so when I was in that courtroom and I realized
We're not hearing you, Ted. Dr. Ted, can you, Well, we missed about 30 seconds of what you were saying.
yeah, sorry about that. I said that one of the problems is that when I went to court, I only had two people that actually knew me, and that was the one who was testifying against me.
Lost them again.
We lost you again.
Oh, yes. You know what I'm saying? Well, actually, I was just saying that, I realized that in the courtroom, that the worst thing that could ever happen to you is for you.
We lost you again. Can you turn your speaker up, possibly? We still lost you. We still can't hear you. I still can't.
Try to fix this.
Pardon me?
I said, you might have to come back to me. I said, I want to fix this.
Okay, we'll come back to you. So, Sensei, are you still there, Sensei?
Dr. Earl, can I just say something?
Yes.
Listen, when I came up, when I was coming up, listen, when we looked at the Black Panthers in Chicago, the Black Stone Rangers, listen, they were a group that were there to protect the community. Somewhere, somehow, listen, this gang stuff got twisted. So now the gangs in our community have become the marauding tiger that's got everybody hiding in their house, scared to come out. We have to re-educate. We have to get them to understand and listen. You're supposed to be, these young boys that are out there with guns and everything, joining these gangs, these are supposed to be the protectors of our community. They were not supposed to be the destroyers of our community. Re-education, they need to know and understand the history. They need to know and understand the history of what we have gone through up until this period of time when all this stuff happened. They don't know.
So
we don't know ourselves.
So the historical context, you say, is very, very important as it relates to the violence that is being inflicted upon one another.
Absolutely.
People have to, that the young people that we are working with have to have a historical context in order to understand why they're doing what they're doing and why they should not be doing what they're doing. Is that safe to assume?
They have to have that. I mean, we are emulating our oppressors. I say that. We are emulating our oppressors. We want to be gangsters. We started taking on gangster names. We wanted to be like the mafia. We wanted to be like them. That was not who we were. That is not who we were. We started taking on these different names because we wanted to be like them. That's because why? We don't have no knowledge of self. We have no knowledge of self.
So would it be safe to say that in what both you and Dr. Ted working with the young population that you work with, that there are three stages, even though you might have a different, your program curriculum is a little different. You being a sensei, but Brother Ted working in a different capacity. But could it be safe to say that we begin with self-determination, that the individual has to, it's self-determination or intent, really intent, self-determination is intent. And then would it be self-discovery? Once the person is self-determined, then the individual becomes, this healing process is taking place and this individual enters into self-discovery once the individual leaves self-determination. Could both of you, is that safe to say from both of your perspectives?
I can deal with that.
Okay, so we go, so are the young people that we take them from self-determination, from the historical context that they've been given on the history of them as a group of people here in America. And then understanding that they become determined for change. And then once in that determination process, they discover themselves. Once they discover themselves in the third stage, in the third progression, then they become, they take on self-mastery. Is that safe to say, in Sensei, and how you work with your population in the arts, in the martial arts? In the martial art form, you have to first be self-determined, then you discover some things about yourself through the rigor that you employ in your curriculum. And then once the individual is confident and feels good about themselves and has a knowledge of themselves, then they evolve into self-mastery. Self-mastery, they start mastering the self.
True.
Imam, Al-Amin, can I
Yes.
add just a comment here? When we look at community violence, I think it's important for us to recognize and to also highlight that this is learned behavior. This is not natural behavior. It is behavior that the children have learned as a result of the relationships that are around them, the media that they're exposed to, the various social exchanges that they have. All of these become how they are influenced and how their minds are shaped. Again, what we need to do is we need to change the influences that are within the community in order for the violence to be negated by something that is more socially developed. And so the core that for me that has to be focused on is the belief systems that young people are exposed to. Because if they're exposed to the belief system of the popular culture, then that becomes a culture of violence, and that becomes a culture of destruction. That becomes a culture of whatever it is, whoever it is, the most powerful and the most dominant is the one that is going to control their fate. But if you change the dynamic so that, again, we return to the culture of our faith, then that becomes the nucleus of the energy, which gives people the ability to prevent the psychological disassociation that results in anxiety and violent-ridden, perplexed personalities.
Dr. Hamid, would you like to chime in?
Certainly. When we say how the children, we are pointing out that we are the responsible parties, not only as individuals, but as parents and as people who value community. Imam Wahideen just pointed out the scope of that responsibility, and it makes sense out of what the Sensei and Dr. Ted have said in terms of how we experience everyday life. I want to share a quote from my teacher and leader, and some of us on this call, who is Imam Wahideen Muhammad, about how our situation or our context culturally influences our behavior and even our science, because we're talking about applying these things to the things that we do with the science of psychology. And I quote, "When we come into the enlightened world of man and man learns psychology and invents a new environment, original nature is shut out, the fitra nature that we refer to in our scriptural language. The walls of man's constructions shut out the lights, the enlightenment that comes from socialization and education, and the pure voices of nature, that is what comes from the natural world rather than from man's social world, socially constructed world. In a situation like that, we don't have something to provide a security for us to keep us in touch with the best of our human nature." So I think that gives a context for what our brothers are sharing with us in terms of their experience and what Imam Wahideen just connected with our obligation, which is to develop an approach to our cultural life, our sciences, based on those things that we know address our best human nature. And we know that's what is in our religion and in other scriptures. In fact, it's in human nature too.
So you use the word you use the word nature. In the Arabic language, you would say fitra,
Yeah.
which is within all human beings, and it leads them to acknowledge and follow Allah's guidance. Is that safe to say that the nature is placed in the human being? It's
It also, brother Imam, and I'm very happy that Dr. El-Amin used the term, because it also is the original nature, which is the child nature. You know, the original nature is the child nature, which is that nature that often gets lost as a result of the social influences that subtract from that original human disposition, that takes people out of their original humanity and places them in a kind of mindset that is dominated by the culture.
So what we're saying is that what I hear you saying in my social work role, what I hear you saying is that they lose their innocence.
That's right. They lose their innocence.
That the innocence is in the nature is the innocence, the fitra is and I don't want to, you know, we've already had the Jummah, but I don't want to, but the saying of Muhammad the Prophet, he's saying that every child is born on the fitra, that every child is born, the nature is born in innocence, really what it's saying, but it is the environment that makes the child thus and so.
Right.
Is that correct to say?
Yes.
And
Yes.
can I chime in?
I want to.
Absolutely. Thank you. I want to add also that, you know, we're talking about the environment, and so far we've only talked about, you know, the micro level, which is the family unit, but we also have to take into perspective, you know, the macro, which is the community and the culture that has been created within the community and the way that this culture was actually created. It's important to, you know, to keep in mind that, you know, systemic racism and institutional racism play a huge role in actually oppressing people and creating a culture where people don't see themselves succeeding and see themselves feeling defeated and feeling that they can't, you know, be like everybody else. So it's really, really critical, you know, to keep that in mind and understand that institutional racism, you know, is something that goes back as far as the founding of this nation. And how, you know, that racism and enslavement still manifests itself in modern day. Like right now in the United States, we have the largest number of people incarcerated that are Black and brown communities from any country in the world. You know, we have the pipeline, you know, the prison pipeline. As early as 4th grade, they are determining how many jails that they should create just by looking at the 4th grade reading and math scores of boys in our communities. So it's really important to, you know, also see the factors that are playing into this. And then in addition to that, the popular culture that we are seeing that is making people, you know, aspire, you know, to be these, you know, caricatures that are not real, that, you know, sadly are not the role models that we want to see young people emulating. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and let's continue. So I just want to continue on. And so all of our panelists, I'd like to ask the question, has the images of the so-called divine influence behaviors as it relates to violence, as it relates to culture, as it relates to social injustice?
Can you repeat that, please? I'm sorry.
has the images of the so-called divine influenced behaviors? I know that we're in this is a weekend where, and I'm not, this is the weekend, this is in the dominant culture, this is Good Friday today. And that we over time in human history have been given a image of the so-called divine that did not look or resemble us. And in every house of worship, especially in the African American community and in other communities, we would find that was prevalent there. And so has that image had any type of psychological effect on the psyche of the people seeing themselves as superior or as inferior?
So brother Imam, you have raised the question of the hour as far as I'm concerned. Because the reality is that the imagery that is projected in that particular portrayal, right, is the imagery that ultimately has led to individuals misperceiving themselves as superior and individuals misperceiving themselves as inferior. Dr. Almontaza, she mentioned we keep talking about this concept of culture. I just want to read a definition so that we can really kind of sink our teeth into what culture does and how it affects the minds of people based upon the various images and symbols that are used within the culture. It says culture denotes a historically transmitted pattern of meanings embodied in symbols in a system of inherited conceptions expressed in symbolic forms, which are communicated and perpetuated and used to develop knowledge about and attitudes about life. So when we take what has been used as a religious symbol, and we use that symbol to project the imagery of what is divine and what is cursed or what is inferior, then we automatically project that into the minds of people who either they identify with that image and they walk away with a misperception of their superiority, or they don't identify with that image and they walk away with a misperception of their inferiority because they cannot connect to the divine.
So what you see is not what you get. What you see is what gets you. Would anyone agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, we have to re-educate. We don't know who we are. We've been taught. I mean, I know for me, and I'm going to be 80 in June. I was taught that we were slaves. That was it. But the real history needs to be taught in our homes and in our schools. The real history. And that means that in every household of color, there should be history being taught about who we are, where we came from, who were the kings and the queens, and so that listen, we grow up understanding who we are. I mean, I know for me, when I came up, we had a village around me. We had a village around us. Everybody knew who everybody was. Everybody knew who everybody's family was. Now today, you're scared to knock on your neighbor's door because you don't know who that person is. This is where we have gotten to. And again, we're trying to be somebody that we're not. I mean, it's strange that a young black man can walk up to another black man and kill him.
So
for what? For no other reason.
So in this culture that you have defined, Imam Sharif, I'd like to segue in a sense. Dr. Amantasor, are you still? Yeah, you're there.
I'm here.
With the culture, we want to look at cultural injustice. Now we set the table, I think, for cultural injustice with the images of the divine. And I really wanted to hear from you because this is an area of your expertise nationally and internationally.
Sure. I started to just dive into it, in my earlier remarks. We as individuals, are created from the cultures that we're in, right? And we develop subcultures. So, just to give an example, I have a cousin who is the same age as I. She grew up in Yemen. Her cultural context, her cultural experience is very different from mine, where I actually was raised in the United States, educated in the United States. And when the two of us come together, yes, there are some commonalities, but our cultures are very different because I grew up in a Western culture. She grew up in a Middle Eastern culture with customs and traditions that necessarily are not, ones that I attribute to in how I live my life. And so, that's how we define, culture, is that we develop as individuals within that culture based on the environment that we are a part of. In addition to that, there is also the understanding of the subcultures. I'm an educator, so, that subculture in the world of education, I'm a part of a whole different cohort of people that are in the field of education. I'm also an activist, and that's another subculture that I'm a part of and be able to navigate. A mother, a wife, a sister, a daughter, all of those things I think play into the creation of culture. And so one of the things that I think is very difficult for people to grasp and understand is we have to meet people where they're at. We cannot make assumptions, and we cannot use what we learn, in history books, what we, read about in the newspaper, what we hear, on, cable TV, on social media. We have to take each and every person for who they are and what they bring to the table, and have no judgments. And unfortunately, we live in a society where there is this form of judgment, where implicit bias seeps into everything that people are doing, and that they're working on. And we see this happening in our public schools, and we see this happening in our Islamic schools and universities, where the perceptions and misconceptions are subconsciously playing out, and disenfranchise the very people that we are trying to work with. So the point of it is that we have to develop cultural competence, and it is imperative for school systems and universities and workplaces to develop these cultural competencies to be able to have a coexistence and cohesive environment where people are able to work, and coexist in a way that really allows people to see each other in their own image. And what I mean by that is in our human form, putting aside all of the, the characteristics or traits that I talked about earlier, but seeing us as, human beings, to our essence, that, we cry the same, we bleed the same, is really, really critical. And so, it's important that, we start working on getting cultural competency to become a priority in all the places that I mentioned earlier. And once we do that, and we're able to meet, young people where they're at and work with them and center them, right? Center their experience, and give them the voice and opportunity to talk about their experiences, and to help them, find their voice and their empowerment is really what we need to be pushing for. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, well, I want to continue with, you made an excellent comment about your cousin in Yemen and you here in the United States. Here in the United States, this is the most diverse place in human history. Number one. Number two, it is the most diverse Muslim community in human history. How do we go as a Muslim community? How do we go from diversity to inclusion as a Muslim community?
Well, we have a lot of work to do. I am not going to sit here and tell you that everything is all great and dandy, because it is not. We have a lot of work to do. And I think that the realization for the immigrant American Muslims came to reality, in the aftermath of September 11th. Many who came here, including my own family, were all about, achieving the American dream, being able to buy a house and fitting into their communities. 9/11 happened, and they realized that they're not a part of the greater part of this country, and saw themselves as a minority, saw themselves as marginalized. And it was really that opportunity that I believe for many, that they realized the experiences of African Americans. And so, that's something that I think we continue to struggle with within the American Muslim community, forging those bridges, working together, seeing one another as equals. It's an issue that continues, and I see it seeping, in our mosques. I see it seeping in our, organizing as an activist. I see it, playing out in many places. And I think that one thing that I would love to see happen, and I appreciate that there are, a couple of organizations that are doing anti-racism within the Muslim community, but I think that there needs to be an international dialogue with African American leaders in the Muslim community and Muslim American leaders in the immigrant community, where we actually talk about this, because really it is debilitating for our ummah to be working in parallels. And it is, important for us to have this national dialogue about race and racism, and how do we combat it. There are people doing great work in their communities to, anti-racism work in the Muslim community, but we need it from our leadership, from, national organizations to take this up and for us to challenge it, and, I appreciate the national organizations putting out, Black Lives Matter support statements, but it needs to be more than just that. It needs to be authentic. It needs to be that all the African American Muslim organizations are interconnected with the American Muslim immigrant-run organizations, where we're able to cohesively be able to come together and work on issues. And to add to that, we even have the parallel worlds or the racism that exists, within the Muslim tradition. There are people who don't want to work with people who are in the Shia community. They're Muslim, we're all Muslim, and we have to put that aside. And I think that when we start creating, these, categorizations of our community, what we do is we make ourselves even more vulnerable in the larger American community. We make ourselves vulnerable for the Islamophobes, for the right wing, for people who want to divide us. And it is really important for us as an ummah to be united, because they don't really know. They don't know who's Sunni, who's Shia, who's Sufi. They just see us as all Muslims. But when we start doing that, we put ourselves, in much more vulnerable position and state. And so that's really critical. And then the other thing that I think is also imperative is that when there is an issue that happens in our community, and I'm talking about the larger American Muslim community, we need to center the directly impacted community at that very moment and give them the platform, give them the space, give them the voice to lead us. We cannot lead on every issue. Yes, I know that, there are civil rights groups, etc., who need to speak up, but find people within your own organization to be the voice from that very directly impacted community. And I'll give you an example. When the Muslim ban hit, there were people talking about the Muslim ban within the American Muslim community that were not a part of the 7 Muslim banned countries. And the people who were from the 7 Muslim banned countries were literally only being called for victimization stories when the press was asking, can you connect us with a family that is separated by the ban? And when I was getting these calls, I've said to leaders in the American Muslim community, have that reporter call me, not to talk about victimization, but to talk about this as an issue affecting my community. And so really having to have those kind of hard conversations with American Muslim leaders doing this kind of work, that if someone calls you for a story on the Muslim ban and you're not a part of that Muslim ban story, say to them, you know what, I want to connect you with an organization that is representing people who are directly impacted by the ban. And let that organization or that individual leading on behalf of their community speak. So I think we have a lot of work to do. And it goes back to the point of centering the directly impacted people and giving them the platform, no matter who they are. And, you know, right now, the biggest issue in our country right now is the anti-Asian hate that is happening across the country. And how important it is for us. Great, we have to condemn and we have to put out these statements, but let's find ways to center this community. Let's find ways to give them the pulpit to speak on behalf of their communities and find their voice to be able to educate people about this and to, you know, bring us on as allies, you know, not as partners. I don't, you know, I want to partner with you, but I still want you to lead in the effort of how we overcome the challenges that we are facing.
Anyone want, Imam Sharif?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Almataza, for that presentation. My limited knowledge that I was able to gain about cultural competency, right, is that it reinforces and it builds on the efforts to address injustice, racism, and bigotry. It builds on that. And then I read that one of the major elements that are emphasized in cultural competency is attitudes, skills, and knowledge. Attitude, skills, and knowledge. And when I read that, it put me immediately into the verse in the Quran, which I'm sure many of us have read, where Almighty God says, "O humanity, we created you from a single pair of male and female and made you into nations and tribes that you will acknowledge each other. Lita'arafu, verily the most honored of you in the sight of God is the one who is most regardful. And truly God has full knowledge and is well acquainted." Well, when we look at this verse and we look at the development of cultural competency, I think the two are joined at the hip with respect to this verse in the Quran, because lita'arafu is often translated that you will know each other, but that's not really what it's saying. You know, that's one component of it. The other component of it is that you will acknowledge each other in terms of each other's worth and value, the human worth and the human value that each person brings into a diverse situation. And that within that human value, there is the ability for us to learn and to further develop our own personalities and our own character. But we have to be willing to listen to the difference that sometimes we may have never been exposed to, and find out whether or not that difference has value in terms of our own growth and development. And I think these are the things that have to come within the Muslim community as well as within the general community. What we see existing in not only the Muslim community, but in the general body of human beings is this inability to see where the growth that they need to have in terms of their own character and their own personality can come as a result of them exchanging with people that they've never exchanged before. And there's something that they can learn from that will not only aid their own personal growth, but will aid the social growth that each individual is going to be exposed to. We have to see each other as this nafsin wahida, this one soul. That's this one soul that is bonded in a family. And when we can connect to that, then there's an opportunity, hopefully, us to connect to each other.
It's interesting that you would say the nafs al-wahid, the soul. One of the things that I had written down here was before the separation of science and religion, the topic of the soul held a very prominent position in discussions related to mental health. And it's very important before the separation of science and religion. We know that if we say psychology, and Dr. Hamid, you are a psychologist, trained psychologist, before the separation, the definition before then was the study of the soul. It was psychology was defined as the study of the soul, but we've gotten away from that. So how do we get back to the study of the soul? You know, Allah says in the Quran, He says, by the soul in the proportion and order given to it, and its inspiration as to its wrong and its right. Truly he succeeds who purifies it, and he fails that corrupts it. Okay? That's Hashem. I think it's from 7 to 10.
Yeah.
Ayah 7 to 10, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So Dr. Hamid?
Yes. Fujuraha wa taqwaha. Yes. So we have to have a frame of reference for our intellect, which is what culture evolves. The taqwa, of course, evolves with it. I think that's our understanding. I want to go to what that does when we don't have respect for that in terms of our social and cultural construction, because that's what we're talking about. Man constructs the social world. So our difficulties are also man-made, if we take that to be the case. And one of the words that's very, very telling that we use in clinical language is disease. And when we understand what the word means, this is not, so not at ease. We have social constructions like racism and all the other varied forms, sexism, Islamophobia, that leave our soul literally at ease because those constructions go against what is in the nature of every human being. We've coined the term, I think Dr. Debbie referred to this before, macroaggressions for those kinds of ideas that are really a neglect of what is universal in our nature, that is our common soul. And all of the kinds of cultural conflicts that we see are from that. So what we are searching for in the present moment, especially through the work of MLPI, is an integrated approach to how the healthy health and wellness of the individual is influenced by culture, especially, and also by, we've hinted at the fact that we have to also be influenced by our scriptural reasoning. That is what we draw from the universals that are in not only in human nature, but also in scripture. We've hinted at that here. And that is the work of the present moment. That is the approach that we've been taking for now several years now in this work together. And it really does reflect the experience that we have that is so rich in terms of the kind of injustice that's been done to the human soul, because we are the most complete example of how the soul can be undermined in terms of its potential.
So, Doc, what I hear you say, how do we use the Quran to modify or change aspects of ourselves?
Well, first we have to have a universal concept of what man is, and that is certainly in Al Quran and in its revelation. And also the prophet himself is he's the universal example for all mankind. That is acknowledged across the world. It's even acknowledged sometimes very quietly, but for those who know, it's acknowledged in this country. Some of us really see the idea that all men are created equal, which really came from Thomas Jefferson, was an underpinning of this nation and its ethic and its ethos that came from the influence of him not only owning a Quran, but studying it in depth and keeping copious notes and influencing that idea, influencing the logic of this culture and its construction with that idea from the very beginning.
Imam Sharif, Dr. Debbie, anyone want to chime in?
I'll yield to Dr. Debbie first.
You know, there is always great opportunity to connect with our you know, with our deen, with our, you know, hadith. You know, we have the best example in the world, and that is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his family. As okay, you can come sit next to me. We have someone who's joining us.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, it's okay. You can leave her. It's okay. And so, you know, we need to look at the examples of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and what he did and how he actually worked with the diverse communities, you know, of his time, right? And you know, from faith traditions, from cultures, he really embodies what we need to do as a ummah in terms of how do we work with, you know, diverse communities and diverse people. And he also, you know, taught us compassion and looking at that compassion, right? And that also, you know, resonates for me as I think more about it, you know, in the 99 names of Allah, you know, that we, you know, have been blessed to be, you know, to know and to understand what they mean. So I think that there is that opportunity for us to be able to, you know, draw from our faith tradition and also the very people, you know, from all the other, you know, faith traditions, you know, alayhi salam Musa, you know, his mother, his sister, his brother, you know, also, you know, Isa, the prophet, you know, Jesus, and all of these other, you know, prophets that have actually, you know, lived during times that we can never even imagine what it was like for them, the trials and tribulations of acceptance, and the things that they endured, you know, during their lifetime, to be able to bring a message to a people and to unite people. You know, and we can look at that, you know, right now in our modern day, you know, we've been fortunate to have leaders, you know, like Martin Luther King, like Malcolm X, who had a message and who had a following and who were able to unite people. So I think that, you know, we need to, you know, find those people that can actually unite and connect people within our communities. And I would caution when I say find, it has to be people that are connected to grassroots movements. And people who really understand what is happening in those communities. Because unfortunately, what I've seen play out is that, you know, you have people from grassroots communities who basically become public figures and then totally are disconnected from the very people that they were a part of and you know, experiencing those challenges, and so far removed from it that it's hard for them to be able to articulate what the experiences are, but also, you know, are disconnected from those communities, the communities that they were a part of. And really, you know, we need to remind our leaders that that is imperative, that they are connected and that they understand, and they check in with their community and they provide opportunities for the communities, you know, if they are from directly impacted communities, to draw more people into the movement, right? And to really help empower others to become leaders and spokespeople from within those communities. So we have a lot of work to do, and I'll end here just for others to chime in.
I think and we have to acknowledge something, and that is that Almighty God in the Quran says that He has placed signs in around us and in us. These are symbols that are meant to communicate some form of science or some form of knowledge. Those who are gifted with the ability to interpret those signs and symbols can deliver messages that ultimately will lead to the development of one's intellectual capacities. There's a man, I forget his name, is Alfred Kubitsky, I believe. He wrote a book called Science and Sanity.
Mhm.
And in his book, he described how those who are making noise, they subtract from the sanity of human beings. Those who can interpret the signs and the symbols and bring knowledge, they will advance and they will ascend the intelligence of the human being. What we find in our communities today and what we find in our society today is we have more noise than knowledge. We have more people who are giving us a lot of noise, but not really the enrichment of science that will aid us in all of those elements that have to do with enhancing our worldview. And our worldview has to be something that is incorporated with other people's worldview. It's not just our worldview, it's all the other people that are part of the human society that also have a worldview that is supposed to come together and form some kind of harmony that is called peace. And that's what is called Al-Islam. Al-Islam has a component that is called peace, but it really is a peace that is a harmony that is supposed to bring people together so that they will live in safety and security in a submission to Almighty God. So one of the objectives that we have to do in terms of teachers, in terms of people who provide therapy for people, we have to be aware of our own worldview, and we have to develop positive attitudes about some of the other worldviews that people have. We have to gain knowledge about the different cultural practices and the worldviews that people have, and how do we incorporate them into a cooperative so that we can build a community in a way that brings and fosters peace and security. And then finally, we have to challenge one's own cultural assumptions. We have to challenge sometimes the assumptions that we make about what we know about ourselves and what we think about ourselves. And we have to sometimes bring those things into a challenge so that we can correct our misinterpretations about who we are and what it is that we're connected to, so that hopefully we can grow and develop.
So is it safe to say that our unity is really in our diversity?
Absolutely. And we have to appreciate that diversity though.
Right. Right. And that diversity has to go into inclusion. The inclusion is recognizing that we've come from one soul, that we're derived from one soul. That's going from the diversity to the inclusion. Is that safe to say, Dr. Hamid, Dr. Debbie?
I say yes. I mean, and that's what I was saying earlier, referring to, that we need to get people to see each other in their own image, right? What is good for me, it would be what I want, what would be good for an individual would be what I want that's good for me. And really helping people have empathy and apathy in order to understand, all of our needs as individuals.
And valuing each other as individuals. There was a quote that I love from Frederick Douglass, the Almighty God grant him paradise. He said, "Men are so constituted that they derive their conviction of their own possibilities largely from the estimate formed of them by others. If nothing is expected of a people, then that people will find it difficult to contradict that expectation."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You worked on by what you're working on.
So we have to begin to expect more from each other and begin to respect the intelligence that each one of us brings to the table.
I agree. And it should be a work in progress that we not only realize that we need to do this when a crisis happens, but it needs to be a continued working, work in progress, that we forge and build these relationships and that we strengthen them, and that we continue to build those bonds.
Do you think that because we live in a Western culture where it's even in medicine, we see it in everything, that being reactionary it outweighs being proactive. And as a community, we've become more reactionary than we have become proactive. Can we see that in the Ummah, especially here in America?
We see it in the general community and in the human population. People are almost conditioned, right, to be emotional. They're almost conditioned to be emotional, and they're really not cultivated to begin to pause and give reflection to a situation before they react to it, right? And so what we particularly as the Muslim community, what we have to understand is the value of dhikr. The whole idea of the value of reflection is to give us an opportunity to contemplate before we activate, right? And so, and so the beauty of understanding this is the fact that when we begin to kind of dig a little deeper, like we're doing today, when we dig a little deeper, then we can come up with perhaps some sound thoughts that will give richness to the actions that we're going to take, rather than just emotional knee-jerk responses to something. We will come up with responses that ultimately have profound long-term positive effects, not only for us, but for our children as well.
Anyone want to chime in? Dr. Hamid?
Let's see, am I unmuted? Yes, I think what we're talking about is having a conversation now in order to elevate our appreciation for the sciences that we all are involved in one way or another, whether it's application or whether it is in trying to develop a more philosophical or ideological notion of these issues that then elevates us to the universals of the kind of respect we're talking about for the soul that is implicit in the universal ethics that are demanded of civilized people. So yes, I think that is the everyday work we're talking about, and that is at hand. It's at hand in this conversation, which includes so many voices, many of us who have been redeemed in various ways by that search for what is universal. So yes, that is the search. So it does go even beyond just cultural competence in the sense of just being able to relate to others and the differences that are diverse, especially in this country, but across the world. But also what is to be respected in every human soul, regardless of what constitutes their culture or their life perspective or their life journey. That is what we're aiming for.
Anyone like to include? I understand we're supposed to be off at 4:30. Is that correct? Please, please place your questions in the chat. For those,
Can I just want to make one final question?
Sure. Yes.
I know one of the subjects was restoring sanity, right? And I think it's important for us to kind of highlight this in terms of, where our sanity perhaps can evolve, right? Sanity is connected to our natural constitution. Our natural constitution is really what is the groundwork for the sanity that we're trying to restore to the human population. If that constitution is disrupted, then the sanity of the individual is disrupted. Several months ago, people were talking about America being in a constitutional crisis. Well, that constitutional crisis had to do with perhaps certain things that were written on a piece of paper. But I still think not only is America in a constitutional crisis, I think the world is in a constitutional crisis. And the constitutional crisis has to do with its humanity. The Constitution that we say shapes the American Constitution and shapes the American society is really designed on the basis of the constitution of the human being.
Right.
And if that constitution is not restored, then what you put on paper doesn't mean anything, because you have to restore that humanity to people in order for that constitution not to be in crisis, and then the society hopefully will not be in crisis, inshallah. But we have to restore that natural, that whole quote that we started with, how are the children, has to do with really understanding how is the human constitution and how is it evolving? How is it developing? How is it ascending so that the society can continue to grow and develop?
So the evolution or the ascendancy of the society is predicated on the Constitution, not the paper Constitution, but the human Constitution.
Human constitution.
And in our way, in the Quran, the mihraj or the ascension of the human being, at the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he ascends, and on each level he greets the individuals from Adam alayhi salam to Isa I can't even think.
All the way up to the seventh level, right?
All the way up to the seventh level,
where he meets Abraham,
where he meets Abraham. But in the evolution of the human being being evolved, all of those represent certain aspects of the human potential.
Right.
Can that be said that Adam is just the original nature?
Right.
And also, so Jesus represents spirit, right? And John represents spirit. You know, one is the all-encompassing spirit, and the other one is the spirit that is able to stay away from you,
Right.
but with love.
The beauty of that scenario is understanding how human beings evolve, right? Because each one of those prophets, peace be upon all of them, had certain outstanding human characteristics, culminating, of course, in the seventh level of Abraham, peace be upon him, who was a man of vision and who was a man of provision, right? He had vision and provision.
That's right.
Right. But the beauty of understanding this, though, is that he didn't stay up there on the seventh level. He came back down, right? Muhammad, the Prophet ﷺ, is the eighth. He is the eighth figure in this picture. So it's, yes, rising in the seventh heavens, but the eighth level is bringing it back down to the earth so that it can be lived.
So, and 8 represents new beginnings in scriptural language. Is that correct?
Eight represents community,
Right.
that is expressive of God's kingdom on earth.
Right. So do we have the same situation with Muhammad the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? He goes up, but he has to come back down after receiving the revelation.
Right.
And Musa alayhi salam, he does the same thing, but he has to come back down to the people with the revelation. So the work is with the people. The healing begins with what? The healing begins with the people. Once you have ascended to a certain level, is it feasible to say that we have to go back, as Dr. Debbie said, we have to go to the people there to give them that which we have that can heal them.
Right. And we have to bring it to the language. We have to give them the language that they understand. You have to speak to the people in a way. This is, again, why, God makes it very clear that he sends prophets to every people. Why? Because those prophets are the people that can speak the language that they can understand, right? And so we have to understand that when this light comes out from God in terms of the word and the spirit that he shares with human beings, he shares it with people so that those individuals can communicate it back to the individuals that are most in need of Almighty God's light.
Dr. Hamid, I see you chomping at the bit. Go ahead.
Now you really have a conversation going here that is it is very broad in scope. In fact, we've used this idea in our work with education to inform everything about education and social life, and we think that it does apply to that because it solves the riddle of what is the nature of man, and we just heard answers to that from our perspective? And those answers are acknowledged among most cultures as universal. One of those levels, though, is the one that kind of presents a barrier for us, and that is the fourth level, which is the academic man. And so, what we're talking about here with this group is bringing new perspectives, new light to that potential that is in all of us. That is the potential for academic life. The word is very curious. It really comes from a Greek word, academics, that means a grove of trees. That's one of its meanings. And we take that to mean a place that is cultivated from the natural world. A grove of trees, more like a park-like setting. So it is to say that we do have to do exactly what you're talking about. Go back to nature, to the common roots of all of what informs a man that are in nature and in human nature. What has been suppressed and what has been even repressed in terms of psychological language. When I say repressed, I mean in our own thinking, in our own motivation, we are reluctant to pursue certain lines of reasoning because our own nature, our own sense of ourselves has repressed that urge in ourselves for the excellence that is in the soul. And academic life is at every level we have a barrier, but that's one that we're working to overcome. In fact, in this context, since as we say science is the lost property of the believer. So we don't mean it's just for the elites. When we say we need to take it back to the street, we need all the voices to be informed and to be elevated so that we understand the nature of the sciences that inform the conversation that becomes culture on the fifth level, if that makes sense. So yes, this is a very, very, very powerful concept for strategic thinking and for freeing the thinking of people universally. And thank Allah.
Thank you. So the fourth level, you said the fourth level, but you didn't, that was Idris on the fourth level, is that correct? And that,
yeah, that's
word,
correct.
Idris comes from the word darasa, is it? Darasa to means to study?
Yeah.
It means to study. And Idris was the only formally educated prophet from what everything that I've researched. Is that correct?
And he was a businessman as well.
As a businessman as well.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was for productive life, not just for, it brings to mind the idea of an ivory tower, which is what we create with objective sciences rather than with the application of those sciences for the common good.
Keep going. Go on, keep going. You're on the road. Keep going.
I mean, there's so much more to say and understand, but it is a key concept that is from Scripture. It has scriptural roots, the sentence itself, and its application to social and cultural construction. It is even in philosophy, it is the question of man, first the question of God, that is the first or biggest issue. And then it's the question of man. What is the nature of man? And then the third is how do we deal with the material world and material reality? And those are the three basic sciences. The material sciences that address the world, the social sciences that address man, and for us, one that has generally been excluded in Western thinking, and that is the spiritual sciences. That is those things that constitute the unseen that our thinking by itself, especially on material world and from our own thinking, cannot understand without guidance, if that makes sense. So it's the bringing together of that those first two sciences in connection with what we have now as scriptural reasoning, which is a thing. It started some years ago at University of Virginia by a group of interfaith group. I think it was led by Jewish folks who started it originally, and it's now I think also has there's an effort at Oxford University in England as well. So this is science itself is coming to this. All of the sciences are coming to this question of how do scriptural narratives inform our sciences. So we're not just talking about something that is happening in some small way. We're talking about something that is stirring in the human soul. And that is the bigger work. That is the more universal work. For us as, I don't even like to use the word because it puts us off as academics. And that means practitioners as well as policymakers, as well as theorists, teachers, all of us, we have to think of ourselves being contribute to that. We've heard that in all the voices in this conversation today.
And I think with that being said, I think we, if there are any questions that anyone or any comments, I've been given the high sign to close in the next 2 minutes. So with that being said, do we have any comments or questions from our listening audience? I know our participants, are there any
I
questions?
do. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I just had a quick question on the quote that the brother just gave in my phone. He said, "Science is the lost blank of the believer." I didn't get that word.
Is
The
lost
lost
property.
Or the
Property.
lost inheritance. Yes. And one of our imams can give you, Imam Earl, Imam Hadin can give it to you more from the Quran.
That's it.
That's it. It's a
Yeah.
lost property.
Science is the lost
got it right, John.
property or inheritance of the believer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. This is a great, all of you are great. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I hope that we were able to, that this panel, I hope I could convene them once again somewhere, somehow, someplace. And maybe Sister Debbie, Dr. Debbie, we can convene, and I had written this down, this establish a national or international conference around what you had discussed. I think that is of paramount importance as we go forward, be it we're practitioners, educators, all of us, there needs to be a conversation that needs to take place for the Ummah. And especially, I think America should, first it should be established in America. America is the leader of the Muslim world. I don't care what everyone else says. America, the most educated Muslims are here in America. And, you know, our mandate is education first and foremost. And so I think that that is something I would love to look at and engage and see that really would let us see if there's a sincerity here. You know, it said religion is sincerity, is that right? So we would see if there is sincerity to establish something of that magnitude, because I think it's very, very important as we go forth out of this pandemic. It's ironic that I had a call from a TV station this morning. What can I be interviewed? Is it all right during the month of Ramadan to have your vaccination? I said, I respectfully request that I don't, you know, that's too, please, that's just, yes, it is. You know, you don't need to interview me like that.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Are we ready, Kareem?
I would be remiss if I didn't get a chance to do some thank yous to wrap up our session. I just want to do some thank yous, but I want to make certain that you were complete.
We're complete. Khalas.
Well, I want to thank everyone, all of our conversationalists for this profound conversation. Thank you again for your time. There was a lot of preparation that led up to this. So again, thank you. Also, I'd like to thank the Muslim Mental Health Conference, Michigan State University Department of Psychiatry, the Muslim Community Cultural Center of Baltimore, Masjid Warathuddin, Irvington, New Jersey, Masjid Muhammad, the Nation's Mosque, Washington, D.C., the Sutton House. I'd like to thank Bushido Martial Arts Academy, Bridging Cultures Group. I'd like to thank Muslim Mental Health Consortium, and also like to thank Khadija Ali, our communications consultant, for her earlier reading, and the entire Muslim Life Planning Institute team. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And that's it for me.
Thank you so much. May Allah bless you all, inshallah.
Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi
Bye.
wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you, Mary.